Riot has completely transformed SHYVANA from one of the most boring and outdated champions in the game into an absolute skirmishing monster. And in today's video, we'll show you exactly what you need to know to start dominating from day one, including a breakdown of SHYVANA's brand new abilities, some secret combos that you need to master, and the key goals that you should be playing around at every stage of the game, while finishing up with the best runes and builds you need to fully unlock SHYVANA's true power. And to ensure that we have the best information possible, we've created this guide in collaboration with SHYVADI, the rank 1 SHYVANA on NA, who just so happened to spend the past year working directly alongside Riot during SHYVANA's development. So you can start winning games instantly. But that's not all we do. At SkillCapped, we're by far the best educational platform for League of Legends out there, as we do what nobody else can, taking the knowledge of challenger players and coaches and filtering out all the nonsense that only works in their elo. We understand most of what you hear only ever works when you have good teammates, which is why we focus entirely on teaching you exactly what helps you climb for your elo. Starting with our newly updated Season 16 Essentials courses for every role that are meticulously structured to guide you through all stages of the game. Then move on to our advanced courses, like our Season 16 Wave Control course, where you can learn exactly how to abuse the new minion changes this season, or our Macro course, where you can learn how to apply challenger level macro decisions in your own games without the need to rely on your team or even your own mechanics. And while you're following these paths, we also release our world famous challenger commentaries every week, where rank 1 players show you exactly how to abuse the best meta champs for your elo, supported with an AMA section below that we always respond to. And best of all, we back everything up with a Climb 5 Divisions rank up guarantee while actively using our service, and a 30-day refund change of mind policy on top of that, so there's literally zero risk. Check out the limited one-time discount in the description or pinned comment and start your journey today. So let's get right into comparing how SHYVANA's new abilities function relative to her old ones. SHYVANA's new passive is called Scale Mail, and it's going to work in a much more updated fashion, as instead of gaining 5 flat armor and magic resist and then 5 resists for each dragon you take, you will now gain Scale Mail stacks. Whenever you get a takedown on a large monster or cannon minion, you will get 1 Scale Mail stack. Upon killing an enemy champion or epic monster, you will gain 3 Scale Mail stacks. Each stack is going to grant 0.4 armor and 0.4 magic resist. So for perspective, if you were to full clear with SHYVANA and take all 6 camps, you would end up with 6 Scale Mail stacks, which then translates into 2.4 armor and magic resist. So basically, this new passive isn't tied down to killing dragons as much as the old one. You no longer deal 20% bonus damage to dragons, and you can stack the passive in more ways than just killing dragons, which is going to make the passive so much more consistent for you. Just by farming efficiently and getting kills throughout the game will give you way more resist than before, especially if it's a game where you can't secure any dragons. Next up, for SHYVANA's Q, the old version was a simple auto reset that dealt bonus damage, but the new one has a little more skill expression. First, there's going to be a passive on her Q that provides her auto attacks with on-hit bonus magic damage equal to a percentage of the enemy's max health. This used to be on SHYVANA's E, as you would need to land her E to then get max health damage on your following autos, but you'll now just get this max health damage on Q. SHYVANA's auto attacks on hit will also reduce the cooldown of her Q by 1.25 seconds. At max rank, Q is on a 6-second cooldown, so if you're skirmishing up close with SHYVANA and are able to auto consistently, then Q uptime is going to be insane. The active portion of SHYVANA's Q is going to empower her next attack within 6 seconds to gain 50 bonus range and deal physical damage. After 1.5 seconds using the empowered attack, or immediately after using a basic attack, SHYVANA will be able to recast her Q for the next 4 seconds. So what this means is that auto weaving is going to be extremely important on reworked SHYVANA. For the dragon form version of Q, you will gain a second recast of the spell, and this recast is going to deal true damage. The true damage proc as it stands right now has a 165% AD ratio, so we'll touch on this more later in the video, but it looks like building SHYVANA AD Bruiser is going to be the most powerful. SHYVANA's new W is going to be a juiced up version of her old one, as the old version of SHYVANA W gave you movement speed and dealt damage around you. The new one is going to provide a shield that lasts for 2.5 seconds, and the shield value will be increased by 30% for every nearby enemy champion. W shield will scale off 5% of your max health, so further incentive towards Bruiser SHYVANA builds. While the shield holds, you will gain 25% bonus movement speed, increased to 43.75% while facing visible enemy champions. After 1 second of using W, you can recast the spell while the shield holds, or it will recast automatically when the shield breaks to deal magic damage around her to nearby enemies. While in dragon form, if the recast from W hits an enemy champion, SHYVANA will heal, and this heal is increased based on her missing health. SHYVANA's E visually is going to look very similar to her old one, but it's actually going to function much differently. It's still the same skill shot with the same shape, but E will no longer go through targets, and instead is an AoE explosion once it hits its first target. New E will no longer mark enemies to provide you with bonus on-hit max health damage. This max health damage was moved over to SHYVANA's Q, which we covered earlier. Instead, you are going to receive more utility, as the ability will slow slow for 30, scaling to 50%. So less damage in exchange for better sticking power and stronger early game gank threat. Dragon Form E looks absolutely incredible visually as SHYVANA spews out a fireball that covers a super large area. New SHYVANA E has a different shape than the old one, as old SHYVANA E sat on the ground in a circle, while the new one will travel on the ground in a rectangular shape until it reaches a target and explodes in a circle. The ability will pass through enemies and scorch the ground along its path for 2 seconds. Upon hitting an enemy champion or large monster, or reaching max range, the fireball triggers an explosion centered around the target that deals the same damage to nearby enemies and applies the same slow. This expansion also scorches the ground in the same radius for 2 seconds, and enemies sitting in it will take damage. You're also going to gain the same slowing effect from the base version of her E, so your sticking power is going to be much better with this reworked version of SHYVANA. And then last but not least, for SHYVANA's R, it's going to work in a very similar fashion to her old one, as you will still need to stack up Fury, and then once that Fury bar is maxed out, you will need to be able to cast R to gain access to her Dragon Form abilities. There are a few differences between the old R and the new one. The new R has a much longer range to it, as you are able to traverse over even the thickest walls in the game. The old R would knock the enemies airborne, but the new one is going to fear enemies in front of SHYVANA for 1 second. The Fury generation rate is also a lot different now. The old version would passively generate 1 scaling to 2 Fury per second, but the new one grants half that at 0.5 scaling to 1 Fury per second. With the new SHYVANA R, you will now get 0.015 extra Fury per second for each point of ultimate ability haste. Old SHYVANA did not gain any Fury stacks while dead, but the new one will passively gain Fury while dead, so that will help to compensate for the lesser Fury generation in certain games. You also gain less Fury for attacking, as the old SHYVANA gained 2 Fury per basic attack, while the new one will grant 1.25 Fury for attacking or using abilities. So while in combat, you're not going to be stacking as much Fury as before, but the fact you now gain Fury even when dead will make for some better late game heroics when you come off of a revive. You'll still gain the bonus health, bonus range, and increased size when using R. So with all SHYVANA's abilities covered, there's definitely a bit more nuance that goes into playing her now, with different combos you can use, so let's break down all the key combos that you need to know before taking SHYVANA into ranked. The biggest change to SHYVANA that will shift how you play skirmishes with her was the change to her Q. SHYVANA's Q now has a reactivation, and this reactivation becomes instant for you if you weave an auto attack in after using Q. So it's now going to be vital when skirmishing with SHYVANA that you try to lead with an auto, use Q, a second auto, and then reactivate your Q. If skirmishing or ganking early on with SHYVANA, this is how you'd look to approach it. If you aren't in range of your opponent, lead with W to gain the movement speed and get as close as possible. The closer you are, the easier it will be to land your E, and it's really important you land your E now because it provides a slow. After this slow hits, as long as the enemy doesn't dash away, you will have time to auto Q for max DPS. If you're in situations where you're right up next to your opponent and you don't need to lead with E for the slow, then there's a really cool combo where you can use an auto, Q, E, auto, and then Q. This will be the max DPS skirmish combo for SHYVANA if you are looking to burst an enemy out as fast as possible. While in Dragon form, your max DPS combo is going to be pretty similar, but you've just got one more Q charge to use now, so you've got to remember to weave in an extra auto attack. If you're right up next to the enemy, then using auto Q, E, auto Q will be the way to go. You can weave your E in sooner if the enemy has a dash, but if you get right on top of them or if they are already CC'd, saving the ability until the end of the combo to get more value out of the slow is what you should do. The main purpose of your E with this reworked version of SHYVANA is not to deal damage, but to help stick onto enemies easier because of the slow. The timing for you when you pop your W in a fight will always depend on the situation. Remember, your W shield is stronger the more enemies that are nearby when you use it, so if you don't need the movement speed initially to close the gap, then saving it is a good idea. W cooldown is 14 seconds, and you max the spell out last, so you'll likely only get one use out of it in a fight anyways. So, for instance, if you are ahead and know you can just one-shot the target you gap close on with R without taking much damage at all, then just save your W for if the skirmish extends beyond that first target you take down. So, now that you've got a good grasp as to what SHYVANA's abilities do and how to combo them, let's break down reworked SHYVANA's playstyle and what your goals are throughout the game. One of the big differences between old SHYVANA and reworked SHYVANA is that your early game gank threat is a lot better. You now have the slow from E, and your W grants 43.75% movement speed when moving towards your target. For reference, old SHYVANA W would give you 30% movement speed at rank 1 in the spell, so you are getting an additional 13.75% movement speed when going in for a gank with SHYVANA's new W. So SHYVANA actually has the ability to look for early ganks now, but hard farming for 6 will still be your biggest priority. Basically, it just means that once you've completed completed your full clear, while you have that downtime before your camps respawn and you need to begin cycling again, your ability to pick up kills in that window will be much better than before. When ganking with SHYVANA, it's very important to remember that her E no longer goes through minions or champions. So if you're playing against a SHYVANA, then sitting behind your minion wave is a great way to ensure you don't get hit by the slow. And if you're playing SHYVANA yourself, then this is where using that extra movement speed from W to close the gap and get as close to the enemy as possible before you use your E is going to be really vital. When clearing your jungle with SHYVANA, something worth noting is that after you've used your auto into Q, you can then spam Q so that the recast automatically goes off after you auto a second time. This way you don't waste any time off your clear, as being able to clear your camps as fast as possible to reach your level 6 will remain incredibly important on SHYVANA. You also want to take a second point in Q at level 3 instead of W if you intend on full clearing. So Q at level 1, E at level 2, another point in Q at level 3, and then W at level 4, and then you'll proceed to max your Q first into E second and W last. SHYVANA's clear is looking incredibly strong after the rework, capable of achieving first clears as quick as 2 minutes and 32 seconds, which even gives you time to gank before Scuttle Crab when replicated. And to make sure your clear is as fast as humanly possible, we've already uploaded our complete clear guide for SHYVANA. So whether you're starting blue, red, or even raptors, you'll know the exact damage thresholds you need to leash camps together, and all the other small tips, tricks, and details you need to shave serious time off your clear. Here at SkillCapped, we enlist the help of world record holding junglers to teach you the fastest clears possible for your chosen champion before they ever go viral. So check them all out today using the link in the description or pinned comment below. Once you've motored through a few clears and reached your level 6 with SHYVANA, your gank potential will be even more insane than before due to the fact that your R can go over every wall in the game. You almost want to approach ganks at level 6 in a similar way to Fiddlesticks now, as going through river isn't necessary at all. If looking to gank for top or bot, you can path around to the enemy team's jungle and then surprise them with a gank from the tri-brush. As you reach the mid game with SHYVANA, she's a champion who excels the most in smaller skirmishes. You won't be dealing a ton of AoE damage with this reworked SHYVANA, so taking those isolated 1v1s when she has her R available is where she's at her best. SHYVANA with her R is going to be able to outduel the majority of champions, so it's going to continue to be something you really want to play around and only force fights when R is up. When you reach later game teamfights with SHYVANA, you want to try and isolate a fed carry on the enemy team with your R. Since you can traverse over every wall in the game with SHYVANA's R, this opens up a ton of unique flank routes you can take. For example, a pretty common one in the mid game will be when you are controlling the river brush in your Dragon or Baron and the enemy team is trying to get mid lane priority. If you notice the enemy team split up with only one of them sitting mid to take the wave, then you can R right over this thick wall and pick them off. Next, let's move on to discussing a few more advanced tips and tricks that you can look to use throughout the game. The first one has to do with securing Dragon or Baron. SHYVANA has really good Dragon and Baron secure because of the fact her Q3 in Dragon form deals true damage. So if you can combo your Q3 in Dragon form with Smite, then you'll be able to deal a ton of damage in an instant. This is really key to keep in mind if you are in a situation where the enemy jungler is lurking for a steal. If your team is trying to burst down an objective and damage is in no way an issue, then saving your Q3 for when the objective drops low is a great way to ensure you secure it for your team. This next tip also involves SHYVANA's Q3 in Dragon form, as it is the massive true damage proc, but the only issue is that since it is your third Q, if you're trying to burst down a target, then it's not very effective because it will take you a while until you can cycle through your Qs and actually gain access to the true damage proc. So what you can do in certain situations is use your Q1 on a tank or another target in a fight, and then activate R to dive in so that you will only need to Q auto Q the enemy to gain access to that true damage proc. We can see this in action in this clip here, where SHYVANA uses Q1 on the Mel, but knows that Jinx is the priority target she needs to take down, so she then swaps focus onto Jinx and bursts her out with the quick auto Q combo. Moving on to the build and runes for this new SHYVANA, as we noted throughout the video, it's definitely looking like she will be most optimally played as a fighter champion. Take everything we say for the build and runes with a grain of salt because things can change very quickly. Riot may nerf or buff numbers that make some items better than others, so we'll give you a guideline of what to focus on, but especially if you're watching this video a few months after release, check in on stat sites to see what's working best. All the major changes to SHYVANA's kit incentivized towards her building as a fighter as opposed to an AP bruiser. First off, SHYVANA's Q3 in Dragon form that deals true damage has a 165% bonus AD ratio, but just a 37.5% AP ratio. Just look at how much true damage SHYVANA's Q deals when building her AD. The Mel's health bar was literally half, and then it disappeared in an instant. SHYVANA's W shield scales off of max health, so it makes prioritizing an item like Nashor's Tooth less valuable than before. And the biggest factor that has us heavily leaning towards AD fighter builds is that SHYVANA's Q cooldown gets reduced by 1.25 seconds when she uses an auto attack. So this just means that having some attack speed in your build and playing around Q will be extremely powerful. The first item that Shivati thinks will be extremely powerful for this reworked SHYVANA is Experimental Hexplate. Hexplate gives SHYVANA everything she wants with attack speed, health, and AD, while providing the ability haste for her R cooldown. Remember, you passively stack Fury faster based on how much ability haste you have for your R cooldown. Since Hexblade provides 30 ultimate ability haste, you get an additional 0.45 Fury per second with Hexblade completed. The base Fury generation is only 0.5 Fury per second with the first rank in SHYVANA R, so with Hexblade completed, you bump that up to 0.95 per second in the early game, which will be really nice to get more opportunities to use R. The second passive on Hexblade provides bonus movement speed and attack speed when you use your R, so this will also heavily amp SHYVANA's skirmish power whenever she dives into a fight with her R. All in all, Hexblade just makes complete sense as a core item on this new SHYVANA, and it's almost like Riot wants you to build it due to the fact that her R Fury generation scales off of R ability haste. For a second item on SHYVANA, Spear of Shojin, Trinity Force, and Stridebreaker should all be viable options. Upfront Burst will be stronger coming out of Trinity Force, while the longer fights last, the more value you get out of Shojin, so swapping between the two based on the enemy composition should work well. Into a squishier comp, you'd prioritize Trinity, and against tankier teams, Spear of Shojin. Nocturne likes to run a core of Hexblade and a Stridebreaker, and it makes a lot of sense for SHYVANA too, as the items will synergize really well to stick onto a target when you dive into a fight. So if the enemy team has a bunch of mobility and you just need as much sticking power as possible, Stridebreaker as a second purchase is something to consider. And then as you get into your later game purchases on SHYVANA, situational bruiser items like Sundered Sky, Death Stance, Starrick's Gauge, Overlord's Bloodmail, and Maw of Malmortius can be considered. Now, if you want to venture the way of an AP build on SHYVANA, we don't think it will be as optimal as AD Fighter, but something to try if you insist on playing AP consists of a Duskin Dawn Rush into Leandri second and Riftmaker third. In regards to SHYVANA's rune page, Conqueror should be the most optimal keystone rune. With this bruiser style of SHYVANA, she's going to thrive in more extended fights, and Conqueror will provide the most amount of power for you with that in mind. Triumph, Alacrity, and Last Stand should all be solid runes in the primary tree, and then for secondaries, you can't go wrong with Inspiration. The majority of junglers these days find the most success going with Inspiration secondary, grabbing Free Boots and Cosmic Insight, and these do make a lot of sense for SHYVANA, especially if you're rushing Hexblade. Getting to Hexblade as quick as possible is going to unlock SHYVANA's dueling strength, so not having to purchase boots is a huge win. So there you have it, everyone. That's a complete look at the reworked SHYVANA as she makes her way to live servers for patch 26.6. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.